Maria woke up before the sun, the pale light of dawn slipping through the thin curtains of her small apartment. Her alarm had been ringing for a full minute, but she stayed still for a moment, trying to gather the strength to begin another long day. As a single mother, her mornings always started early and ended late. Yet she never complained. Her son Eli slept curled up beside her on the mattress they shared, his tiny hands gripping the faded blanket like a lifeline. She brushed a gentle hand over his hair and whispered his name, reminding him it was time for school. But he didn't stir, and she smiled softly. Knowing he had stayed up late doing his coloring pages while waiting for her to finish folding laundry, Maria slipped out of bed and hurried to the kitchen. Trying not to wake him too soon, the apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that came from not owning much furniture. She prepared a quick breakfast, warmed leftover rice, poured a little milk in a cup, and checked the time nervously if everything went smoothly. She could drop Eli at his babysitter's place before heading to the office building where she worked as a cleaner. But her phone buzzed sharply on the table, breaking the peaceful silence. Maria frowned as she saw the babysitter's name. When she answered, the woman spoke quickly, apologizing, explaining she had a family emergency and couldn't take Eli that day. Maria's heart sank, her hand tightening around the phone. She tried to ask if there was any other option, but the babysitter said no and ended the call, leaving Maria staring at the blank screen. She knew she didn't have backup childcare. She barely had money for one babysitter, let alone alternatives. She looked at Eli, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that their day had just become complicated. Maria pressed her lips together, thinking fast. Missing work wasn't an option. They were already one late rent payment away from trouble. The office rules were strict, but she had seen other parents bring their children for emergencies before. Maybe if he stayed close, stayed quiet, no one would make it a problem. She whispered a little prayer, then gently woke Eli, telling him they had to leave early today. Eli rubbed his eyes, nodded, and got ready without complaining. His small backpack bouncing as he followed her, they stepped into the chilly morning air, and Maria held his hand tightly as they walked to the bus stop. The ride felt longer than usual, every minute filled with worry, but Eli leaned his head on her arm, trusting her completely. When they reached the tall office building, its glass windows shining with early light, Maria paused outside. She kneeled beside Eli and spoke quietly, reminding him to stay close. Stay quiet and listen to her. He nodded again, his dark eyes full of innocence and hope. Maria forced a smile and led him inside. Inside the building, the lobby was already busy, workers rushing in with coffee cups and briefcases. Maria kept her head down and guided Eli toward the supply closet where she stored her cleaning cart. She handed him a small coloring book and a pencil, telling him he could sit in the corner while she worked. Eli settled down on the floor, his back against the wall. Looking as small as a leaf in a storm, Maria started mopping the hallway, glancing back at him every few seconds, relieved that he stayed quiet and calm. But trouble arrived faster than she expected. Ms. Turner, the building manager known for her sharp voice and colder attitude, stepped around the corner. Her eyes immediately narrowed when she spotted Eli. She crossed her arms and demanded to know why a child was in the building. Maria hurried toward her, trying to explain the sudden emergency, the canceled babysitter, the desperation she felt. But Ms. Turner didn't care, her voice cutting through the hallway like a knife. She said company rules didn't allow children during work hours. No exceptions. Maria tried again, promising Eli wouldn't disturb anyone, that she just needed the day to figure things out. Ms. Turner refused, her tone growing harsher by the second. Workers passing by slowed down, watching the scene with sympathy, but not daring to interfere. Eli stood up, holding his coloring book against his chest, his eyes wide with fear. Maria could see his little hands shaking, and it broke her heart before she could say anything else. Ms. Turner announced that Maria was fired, effective immediately. The words felt like a heavy stone dropping straight into Maria's chest. She stood frozen, unable to breathe, while Eli stared between them, confused. The hallway seemed to echo with silence, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Maria slowly gathered her things, her hands trembling. Eli walked beside her silently as they left the building. Outside, the cold air hit them. But it wasn't as cold as the humiliation she felt inside. Her job was gone. Her security was gone. And worst of all, her son had witnessed it all. Maria held Eli close as they walked down the street, not knowing what the rest of the day would bring. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly afraid. Maria held Eli's hand tightly as they walked away from the office building, the cold morning breeze brushing against their faces like a reminder of everything they had just lost. She tried to stay calm for him, even though her chest felt heavy and her eyes burned with unshed tears. Eli looked up at her with worried eyes. Clutching his coloring book like a shield, he didn't understand every detail, but he knew something terrible had happened. His mother always wore a brave smile, even on the hardest days. But today her smile was nowhere to be seen. They walked in silence for a while. Passing the tall shops and crowded bus stops, Maria kept glancing at her phone, as if waiting for a message that would magically fix everything. But the screen stayed dark, offering no hope, no solutions. She felt the weight of rent, electricity bills, grocery costs, and school fees pressing on her shoulders. Her job may have paid little, but it was their only steady income. And now it was gone because she had tried to protect her son. A bus passed by, splashing a bit of dirty water near their feet, and Eli stepped closer to her. "Mom," he whispered softly, "did I do something wrong?" The question cracked her heart open like glass breaking on stone. Maria knelt down immediately, wrapping her arms around him. "No, baby," she said, her voice shaking despite her best effort. "You didn't do anything wrong at all." She held him for a long moment, trying to steady her breathing, but Eli's small body trembled against hers. And she knew he was scared too when they stood up again. They continued walking, this time slower. The city around them seemed louder than usual. Cars honking, people rushing, voices echoing. It felt like the whole world was moving too fast, while her own world had suddenly stopped. Maria tried to plan the rest of the day in her mind, but everything felt blurry. Should she look for another cleaning job immediately? Or try to talk to the building's HR department? Or call her landlord and ask for a little more time? Every idea felt impossible. Every path felt blocked. As they reached a small park on their way home, Maria decided to sit on a bench for a moment. Her legs felt heavy, and her thoughts were tangled like knots she couldn't loosen. Eli sat beside her, swinging his legs slowly, his eyes on the ground. He fiddled with his pencil, then whispered, "I wish I could help." The words were simple, but the emotion behind them hit Maria deeply. She looked at him, at his small hands trying to be strong, at his innocent face trying to understand grown-up problems. She forced a soft smile and brushed his cheek. "You already helped me, sweetheart," she said. "You're the reason I keep going." A group of school children walked past the park, laughing and carrying lunchboxes. Eli watched them nervously, pulling his knees closer to his chest. Maria knew he felt out of place, different from other kids. Most children his age never had to worry about their parents losing a job or being yelled at by a manager. Most children never had to sit quietly in office hallways pretending they were invisible. Seeing this made Maria's heart tighten again. After a few minutes, she stood up and took Eli's hand. Ready to continue walking home, the journey felt long, as if each step carried another ounce of stress. When they finally reached their apartment building, the familiar sight of the chipped paint and cracked steps greeted them. Inside, the air felt warmer, but not comforting. Maria placed her bag on the small table and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on her knees, hands covering her face. She felt exhausted, defeated, unsure how she would survive the coming weeks. Eli placed his coloring book beside her and sat close, leaning his head on her arm for a few minutes. They stayed like that in silence. Maria knew she had to think clearly, but the panic inside her kept rising. Should she call her sister for help? Even though they rarely spoke anymore, should she borrow money from a neighbor? Even though she hated asking for favors, should she try walking back to the office tomorrow and beg Ms. Turner for a second chance? She didn't know, and the uncertainty scared her. Eli finally whispered, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Maria looked at him again, this time with tears she couldn't hide. She pulled him into her arms and held him tightly. "Yes," she said softly, even though she wasn't sure how. "We're going to be okay." It wasn't a promise she knew she could keep, but it was a hope she refused to let go of. As the day slowly moved forward, Maria forced herself to stand. She wiped her eyes, washed her face, and tried to breathe deeply. She made a simple lunch for Eli. Even though her hands shook the entire time, she watched him eat quietly. Grateful for his innocence, she knew she had to be strong, because life had never given her the luxury of falling apart for long. By afternoon, she started listing places she could look for work. Restaurants, stores, cleaning agencies. Anything that would hire quickly, she rehearsed what she would say. How she would explain her situation without sounding desperate. Yet deep down, she felt a small spark of determination. A tiny flame refusing to die, for Eli's sake. She would find a way. She always did. But neither she nor Eli knew that someone else, someone unexpected, was about to walk into their lives soon and change everything. Inside the office building Maria had just been chased out of. Life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Workers hurried across the hallways, balancing coffee cups, tapping on phones, and whispering about deadlines, but beneath the routine noise, everyone felt the heaviness of the morning. People had witnessed Maria being fired, and though no one spoke up to defend her, many felt guilty. Some had lowered their eyes. Others had stepped aside, and everyone had silently agreed it was wrong. Yet the building moved on, as big companies often do, swallowing small tragedies without a pause. In the break room, two receptionists, Lily and Mark, whispered over the coffee machine. "That was too harsh," Lily murmured, shaking her head. "She didn't deserve that," Mark replied, glancing toward the hallway, as if afraid Ms. Turner might appear. They had seen Maria work for years, always quiet, always respectful, always doing her best, and they had seen Eli too. The little boy who sometimes waited for his mother outside the supply room when she worked extra hours. They remembered his shy smile, his soft manners, the way he always said thank you whenever they offered him a cookie. Mark sighed and leaned against the counter. "I get that rules exist," he said. "But there's a difference between rules and cruelty." Lily nodded as she stirred her coffee. Ms. Turner doesn't see that difference. Everyone in the building knew the manager's reputation. She enforced every rule with pride, never bending, never softening, never considering the human side of anything. In her eyes, emotions were weaknesses, and empathy was a useless decoration. Meanwhile, in the HR office on the 4th floor, Ms. Turner was already writing her report. She sat stiffly in her chair, tapping her pen with satisfaction. She described Maria as unprofessional, irresponsible, and unfit for employment. She didn't mention the canceled babysitter or the quiet child sitting harmlessly on the ground. She only mentioned the violation. She believed she had done the right thing, and she wanted HR to agree when she finished typing. She leaned back with a self-satisfied sigh. To her, this was another victory. Another moment proving she maintained control. In the next room, two HR officers, Mr. Daniels and Sophie, discussed the situation quietly, honestly. "Firing her was unnecessary," Sophie said, lowering her voice. "She's one of the hardest workers we have," Mr. Daniels agreed. "Flipping through old attendance records, always early, never complains, barely ever takes a day off. She must have been desperate," Sophie added, thinking of the little boy clinging to his mother's leg. But neither of them felt brave enough to challenge Ms. Turner's decision. They were employees too, and they had seen what happened to people who disagreed with her. Rumors began spreading by noon, passing through the hallways faster than the scent of fresh coffee. By lunchtime, everyone knew Maria had been fired for bringing her son to work. By early afternoon, people were already arguing quietly about it behind half-closed doors. Some defended the rules, insisting policies existed for a reason, but most whispered that compassion should have come first. The building felt divided, with each conversation holding a hint of unease. Just after 2 o'clock, a buzz moved across the office floors. People straightened their desks, adjusted their shirts, and glanced nervously at each other. The new regional director was arriving today. A man no one had ever met, They had heard rumors that he was young, ambitious, and determined to improve things. But they didn't know what improve meant yet. Some feared new changes, while others hoped he might soften the environment Ms. Turner had helped shape. Downstairs in the lobby, the security guard stood taller than usual. He watched as a black car pulled up in front of the building. A man stepped out, wearing a simple suit. Not flashy, not intimidating. He looked around the building with calm eyes. Taking in every detail, this was Daniel Reyes, the new regional director. No one knew him yet, but his presence already made people straighten up in their chairs. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, not loud, not aggressive, just steady. When Daniel walked into the lobby, the receptionist greeted him warmly. He returned the greeting with a small smile, then glanced at the office directory. As he walked toward the elevators, a strange tension followed him. People stepped aside politely, whispering behind him, trying to guess what he would change first. When Daniel reached the top floor, he was introduced to the department heads, including Ms. Turner. She smiled with forced politeness, already plotting how to impress him. But Daniel didn't seem impressed by polished greetings or rehearsed presentations. He asked genuine questions, listened carefully, and observed the atmosphere of each department. The more he walked through the building, the more he felt something off. He sensed fear in people's voices, stiffness in their posture, hesitation in their words. This wasn't how a healthy workplace functioned. Something heavy lingered in the air, and he didn't know why yet. It wasn't until he entered the break room late that afternoon that he overheard two employees whispering again. He caught the words fired, child, and not fair. The tone in their voices made him pause. He turned his head slightly, listening without intruding. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in his mind. Something had happened that morning, something that still weighed on the entire staff. And Daniel intended to find out exactly what it was. But none of them knew that this moment, this small overheard whisper, would soon unravel a truth that connected deeply with his own past. And by the time Daniel discovered the full story, the entire building would never forget what true leadership looked like. Daniel stepped out of the break room slowly, the faint voices he overheard still echoing in his mind. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but he could sense something was wrong in the building, something deeper than a simple disagreement or a minor incident. The tension clung to the walls like invisible dust, and every employee he met seemed careful with their words, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. Daniel had been in management long enough to recognize the signs of a fearful workplace, and he knew fear never appeared without a source. He intended to find it. One step at a time, he walked through the hallways with calm eyes, greeting employees, observing their reactions. Some smiled nervously, others stiffened, and a few seemed relieved just to be acknowledged. Daniel noticed the difference immediately. To some, leadership meant power, but to him, leadership meant presence. A real leader didn't need to be loud or harsh. A real leader needed to be human. When he reached the administrative floor, Ms. Turner was already waiting for him outside her office. She stood with her shoulders straight and her chin lifted, giving him a sharp, rehearsed smile. "Welcome, Mr. Reyes," she said in a tone that tried too hard to sound polite. Daniel nodded, returning a calm smile. "Thank you." "Ms. Turner?" He noticed how the employees behind her stiffened as soon as she spoke. He noticed how no one made eye contact when she stood near them. He tucked that observation quietly into the back of his mind. Ms. Turner began proudly showing him around. Pointing out numbers, charts, and strict policies, she spoke of efficiency, order, and discipline, as if they were the only pillars that mattered. Her voice was confident, even proud, but lacking warmth. Daniel nodded politely, but inside, he wondered where compassion fit into her view of leadership. He wondered if she had ever considered the lives of the people behind the policies she enforced so aggressively. As they walked past the HR office, Daniel paused. "I'd like to see the employee files for the cleaning staff," he said casually. Ms. Turner blinked in surprise, not expecting his interest in the lowest-paid department. "Of course," she said. Trying to hide her confusion, she guided him inside, where two HR officers quickly stood up, nervous but respectful. Daniel smiled gently at them, asking for the files with genuine kindness. He didn't miss the way both officers glanced nervously at Miss Turner before responding. Another note he quietly filed away in his mind. While flipping through the files, he noticed Maria's name. Her file was thin, filled with years of perfect attendance, glowing remarks, and consistent hard work. At the end of the file, stapled to the last page, was a freshly written report from that very morning. He read it slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly at the cold description of what had happened. The report said Maria violated rules by bringing a child to work. It said she disrupted the workplace and ignored warnings. But something about the tone felt exaggerated. Harsh, almost personal. Daniel looked up at the HR officers. Did anyone speak to her before termination? Sophie shook her head quietly. She tried to explain, "Sir." But she wasn't given a chance, Mr. Daniels added. She's been a model employee for years. Daniel tapped the report with his finger, feeling something stirring inside him. "Where's the security footage from this morning?" he asked. Miss Turner stiffened slightly. "I can have it brought up, but it's not necessary." "The report, I prefer to see it myself," Daniel said gently, but firmly. His tone left no room for argument. Minutes later, Daniel sat in a small security room as the footage played on the screen. He watched Maria walking in with her son, her hand on his shoulder, guiding him with care. He watched Eli sit quietly in the corner with his coloring book. Not making a sound, he watched Maria cleaning the hallway, constantly checking on the boy with worried eyes. Finally, he watched Ms. Turner storm around the corner. Arms crossed, voice sharp, the footage had no sound. But Daniel didn't need sound to understand the situation. The child wasn't running, wasn't playing, wasn't causing trouble at all. But Maria was fired anyway. Without hesitation, without compassion, Daniel leaned back in his chair. And for the first time since arriving, his calm expression cracked. There was something about the sight of that little boy standing silently with his coloring book that hit him in a place he rarely let anyone see. He remembered standing like that once, in a building just like this one. Watching his own mother get scolded for bringing him along when she had no choice. He remembered the shame, the fear, the helplessness of that moment. A memory long buried rose to the surface, bringing with it a quiet anger. Not rage, not loud frustration, but the kind of deep, steady anger that only surfaces when someone sees a reflection of their past in someone else's suffering. He didn't say anything for a long time. The security guard waited silently. Sensing the shift in his expression, finally, Daniel stood up, straightened his jacket, and said in a calm voice, "I need her address." The guard nodded and printed it out. Handing it to him carefully, Daniel thanked him and walked out of the room with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. No one in the building knew the storm that was gathering inside the new director. No one knew that by the next sunrise, the company's cold reputation would be challenged. And no one knew that Daniel Reyes, the silent man walking through the lobby with steady steps, was heading toward the apartment of a woman who believed her life had completely fallen apart. Unaware that help, justice, and a second chance were already on their way to her doorstep, Daniel drove away from the office building, with the printed address resting on the passenger seat. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, the calm expression on his face slowly melting into something more personal. He wasn't just a director heading to investigate a termination anymore. He was a man walking toward a memory that had shaped his entire life, a memory he had buried deep, believing time had softened it. But seeing Maria and her son on that footage had pulled the old wound open again. As he drove through the city streets, he couldn't help replaying the images in his mind. The little boy sitting silently with the coloring book reminded him too much of himself. That same stillness, that same fear of being in a place where children didn't belong but had nowhere else to go. He remembered the tightness in his chest, the way he clutched his mother's hand. He remembered wishing he could disappear so he wouldn't make her life harder. He remembered the shame of grown-up voices arguing about him as if he couldn't hear them. But he had heard every word back then. Just as that little boy had heard every word this morning, Daniel's mother, Rosa, had been a cleaner too. She had worked long hours in corporate buildings where no one ever learned her name. But she carried herself with dignity even when life pressed her down. Daniel remembered watching her mop floors late at night, her back aching but her smile gentle. She always tried to hide her exhaustion from him, But a child can see more than adults realize. The strongest memory of all came rushing back like a cold wind. It was the night she brought him to work, because she didn't have a babysitter. He remembered sitting in a hallway with a small toy car, trying not to make any noise. He remembered hearing footsteps. Then a harsh voice echoing sharply across the room. A manager had yelled at her for bringing a child, calling it unprofessional. The shame in her eyes had been unbearable to watch. And then, just like Maria, she had been fired on the spot. Daniel had watched his mother break in silence. He remembered the way she squeezed his hand afterward, as if apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. That memory had fueled him for years, pushing him to study harder, work harder, rise higher, not for revenge, but to someday create spaces where people like his mother were treated with respect. Now, as fate would have it, life had brought him face to face with the same cruelty he once lived through, only this time he had the power to change the outcome. And he intended to use it. Daniel stopped at a red light, exhaling slowly through his nose. He didn't want to approach Maria with anger, because she had experienced enough harshness already. He wanted to approach her with understanding. With dignity, with the compassion she was denied this morning. He wanted to say what he wished someone had told his own mother back then. That she wasn't wrong for trying, that she wasn't irresponsible for being poor, that sometimes people bend not because they are weak, but because life gives them no choice. The light turned green, and he continued driving. He passed rows of old buildings, grocery stalls, and narrow streets where children chased each other. It reminded him of the neighborhood he grew up in. He remembered the meals his mother cooked from scraps, the nights they slept hungry, the mornings she encouraged him anyway. Life doesn't stay heavy forever, she used to say. Someone will see your heart one day, and they will give you a chance. He never knew that he would become the very person she described, someone with the chance to give others a chance. As Daniel approached Maria's neighborhood, the streets grew quieter, the buildings were older. Paint peeling, laundry hanging from balconies. It was the kind of place where people survived through hard work and hope. He parked the car outside the small apartment building and turned off the engine. For a moment, he sat still, trying to collect his thoughts. He didn't want to overwhelm Maria or frighten her. He wanted to offer help in a way she could trust. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The hallway smelled of old wood and detergent. Children's drawings were taped to one wall, and a broken elevator stood silently in the corner. Daniel checked the address again and walked up the stairs. He could feel his heart beating faster. Not with nerves, but with purpose. Each step reminded him of his own past, of the staircase he once climbed with his mother after she lost her job. He remembered her silence, the way she pretended everything was fine, even when he knew it wasn't. Now he stood in front of Maria's door. He raised his hand slowly and knocked for a moment. Everything was quiet on the other side. Then he heard footsteps. Soft and hesitant, the doorknob turned, and the door opened just enough for Maria to peek through. Her eyes widened when she recognized him, confusion and fear mixing on her face. Daniel softened his expression and spoke in a gentle tone. "Maria," he said, "I'm here because what happened today wasn't right." He paused, his voice warm, steady and honest, "and because I used to be that kid." Maria's hand trembled on the door. Eli peeked from behind her, holding his coloring book tightly. And in that simple, fragile moment, Daniel knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Maria stood frozen at the doorway, unsure whether she should step back or step forward. Her mind raced with fear, confusion, and a quiet hint of hope she didn't dare trust yet. She had never seen the new director up close, and certainly never expected him to show up at her home. Eli clung to her leg, his wide eyes peeking from behind her dress, as he tried to understand who this man was. Maria swallowed hard, her voice barely steady as she whispered, "Sir, why are you here?" Daniel kept his posture calm, respectful, and gentle. He didn't push the door, didn't raise his voice, didn't look impatient. He simply gave a small nod, as if reassuring her she wasn't in trouble. "I came because what happened today wasn't fair," he said softly, "and because I've been where your son is standing now." His words carried a weight that made Maria blink slowly. Unsure if she heard correctly, she opened the door a little wider. Enough to let the hallway light fall on his face. He looked sincere. Not like the supervisors who spoke with rehearsed sympathy, but cold intentions. There was something honest in his eyes, something human. Maria finally stepped aside and whispered, "You can come in." Daniel entered the small apartment quietly, noticing the worn furniture, the single mattress, the dish of simple food on the table. He wasn't judging. He was remembering. He had lived in a place just like this, years ago. Holding on to hope the same way Eli held that coloring book, Maria stood with her hands clasped in front of her. Unsure where to begin, Eli slowly moved closer. Still studying Daniel like a puzzle he wasn't sure he could trust yet, Daniel crouched down to be at Eli's height, a kindness that made the little boy blink in surprise. "You like drawing?" Daniel asked gently, pointing at the coloring book. Eli nodded, clutching it tighter. "I used to draw too," Daniel said with a soft smile. "When my mom worked in buildings like the one we met today." Eli's eyes widened slightly. As if a piece of the mystery began to make sense, Maria sat down slowly on the edge of the mattress, her hands trembling with emotion. I tried to explain," she whispered, "but Miss Turner?" She wouldn't listen. Daniel's expression tightened just enough to reveal a quiet anger beneath his calm. "Yes," he replied gently. "I saw the report. And the footage." Maria gasped softly, her cheeks warming with shame at the thought of her struggle being recorded. But Daniel shook his head, offering reassurance. "There's nothing wrong with what you did," he said. "Your son was quiet, respectful. And you were doing your job?" A tear slipped down Maria's cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, but Daniel's voice stayed calm and steady. "You were put in an impossible situation," he said, "and instead of helping you, someone chose to punish you." The words felt like a bomb over a wound she'd been carrying since morning. She exhaled shakily, as if releasing a weight she'd been holding since sunrise. Daniel sat on the small chair across from her, carefully choosing his words. "I want to offer you your job back," he said. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, wondering if this was a dream, but Daniel continued. "Not the same position," she blinked, confused. "I want you supervising the cleaning staff," he said. "You've been doing the work of a leader for years. Even if no one gave you the title," Maria covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed. "A supervisor?" she whispered, her eyes filling again. Daniel nodded, "with better pay." "In flexible hours?" He glanced at Eli, who was staring at them with cautious hope. "You shouldn't have to choose between your job and your child," Daniel added softly. "And no parent should be punished for trying to survive." Maria let out a shaky laugh mixed with tears, unable to believe the sudden shift in her fate, sir. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Daniel offered a gentle smile. "You don't have to say anything right now." He noticed the exhaustion in her face, the kind that comes from fighting alone for too many years. "You deserve support," he said quietly. "Not punishment." Eli finally stepped a little closer to him, his voice small. "Are you going to be Mom's new boss?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Yes, I am." Eli nodded slowly, as if testing the idea in his mind. "Are you nice?" he asked innocently. Maria gasped slightly at her son's boldness, but Daniel only smiled. "I'm trying my best to be," he answered. "Especially to people who deserve kindness." Eli seemed satisfied and walked over to his mother. Leaning against her arm, Maria wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "It's going to be okay." And for the first time since losing her job that morning, she actually believed it. Daniel stood, ready to leave and give her space, but before I go, he said, "I want you to know something important." Maria looked up, waiting, her heart beating fast. Daniel's voice softened, deepened, filled with a truth he rarely shared. "When I said I used to be that kid," he whispered, "I meant it. My mother lost her job the same way you did, and I promised myself one day, if I ever had the power, I would stop it from happening to someone else." Maria covered her heart with her hand. Moved beyond words, Eli stepped closer, sensing something meaningful. Daniel nodded once more, then headed toward the door. "You start tomorrow," he said. "Take tonight to rest." "You deserve that much," Maria whispered. "Thank you." "Thank you for seeing us," Daniel paused, offering a final, gentle smile. "Someone once saw me," he said quietly. "Now it's my turn." He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him, leaving Maria and her son standing in the soft glow of hope that had finally entered their lives again. The next morning arrived with a soft golden light slipping through Maria's curtains. For the first time in a long time, she didn't wake up with dread tightening her chest. Instead, she felt a strange calmness, a gentle warmth, as if someone had finally lifted a heavy stone from her shoulders. Eli was already awake, sitting at the table with his coloring book, his legs swinging happily. When he looked up and saw his mother smiling, his face brightened instantly. "Mom," he whispered, "are we going back today?" Maria nodded softly, brushing his hair aside. "Yes, baby," she said, "but today feels different." She dressed carefully, choosing her cleanest shirt and tying her hair neatly. Every movement felt lighter, as if each breath carried new strength. She watched Eli put on his small shoes, humming quietly to himself for once. The morning didn't feel rushed or frightening. It felt like a doorway opening, leading them into something better when they walked outside. The cold breeze felt gentle instead of harsh. Maria held Eli's hand, and together they walked toward the bus stop. The city seemed brighter, the streets less heavy, the noise less sharp. Even the bus ride felt new, like the world was showing her a softer side she had forgotten existed. When they reached the office building, Maria paused for a moment at the entrance. It was the same tall glass tower she had walked out of in tears just a day before. But now, instead of shame, she felt determination. Instead of fear, she felt dignity. She looked down at Eli, who squeezed her hand proudly. "You're strong, Mom," he whispered, and she felt her heart swell inside the lobby. Workers whispered softly as they recognized her. Some looked guilty, others relieved. A few even smiled shyly as if silently apologizing. But the biggest surprise came when the elevator doors opened and Daniel stepped out. He didn't act like a distant boss. He walked straight toward them with a warm, respectful smile. "Good morning, Maria," he said, "and good morning, Eli." Eli waved shyly, hiding half his face behind the coloring book he had insisted on bringing. Daniel then turned to the employees standing nearby, his voice calm but firm. "I want everyone to know," he said, "that Maria is returning today as the supervisor of the cleaning staff." The announcement traveled through the lobby like a ripple. Maria stood still, stunned, as people murmured with surprise. Some clapped quietly, others nodded approvingly. Even the security guard gave her a proud smile. For the first time, Maria felt seen not as a cleaner, not as someone disposable, but as someone respected. As they walked toward the cleaning department, Daniel spoke softly to her. "You don't need to rush today," he said. "Just meet your team. Organize things your way." Maria nodded gratefully, her heart steady and confident. She knew the work would be hard, but she was no stranger to hard work. The difference now was that she finally had a chance to lead instead of just survive. When they entered the staff room, her co-workers stood up, surprised and hopeful. Many had worked beside her for years, watching her clean hours after her shift ended. Some hugged her, others congratulated her. One woman whispered, "We always knew you belonged in charge." Maria's eyes filled for a moment, but she blinked the tears away and smiled. It felt unreal, but also deeply right. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the building, Ms. Turner packed her office silently. Daniel had removed her from her managerial role the previous evening, not out of revenge, but because cruelty had no place in leadership. Some employees watched as she left with stiff shoulders and a bitter expression. For years she had ruled through fear, and now fear had finally let go of the building. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by the staff floor again. He found Eli sitting quietly in a corner, waiting for his mother while drawing a picture. It showed 3 figures: a woman holding a broom, a small boy with a book, and a tall man smiling beside them. Daniel crouched down. "Touched by the drawing? Is that me?" he asked with a soft laugh. Eli nodded proudly. "You fixed everything." Daniel shook his head gently. "Your mom did that. I just helped her stand where she always deserved to stand." When Maria returned from checking rooms, she saw Daniel and Eli talking like old friends. The sight brought a lump to her throat, not because she needed saving, but because someone had finally treated her with humanity. Daniel stood up, gave her a respectful nod, and said, "If you need anything, my door is always open." He didn't say it out of duty. He said it out of sincerity. Maria felt her heart warm with gratitude she would never forget. That evening, when she and Eli walked home, the sky glowed with soft orange light. Eli skipped along the sidewalk. Humming joyfully, Maria watched him, her chest swelling with relief and pride. Yesterday, she had walked these same streets feeling hopeless today. She walked them with a lifted spirit and a future she could finally believe in. At their apartment door, Eli stopped and hugged her tightly. "You're the best mom in the world," he whispered. Maria held him close, her eyes shining. "No," she said softly. "I'm just a mother trying her best, and somewhere across the city." Daniel sat in his quiet office, looking out the window at the fading sunset. He thought of his mother, of her strength, of the promise he had made long ago, and for the first time in years, he felt that promise had truly been honored. Maria had a new beginning, Eli had safety, and the building had found its heart again. All because one man remembered what it felt like to be that kid and chose compassion instead of power. A choice that changed everything. A choice that began a whole new chapter for all three of them.